We are launching a paper that has been a collective, collaborative, and global effort. We are defining the state of the field of feminist foreign policy. What does it look like in 2023? We're so excited to see those of you who are joining us in person here in the beautiful City View room at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs, where I'm pleased to serve as an adjunct professor in the Gender Equality in International Affairs program, which is directed by Dr. Shirley Graham, and we're grateful to be partnering with her and her program here today. Thank you, Shirley. I'm also grateful to acknowledge this morning our feminist funders, without whom the paper, the event, and the movement would not be possible. The Global Fund for Women, the Ford Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, and the Open Society Foundations. Their support isn't just about a paper, but about a movement of people who are coming together toward a foreign policy for people, peace, and planet. For if we are to have any hope of contending with the challenges of today, challenges that do not observe traditional borders, conflict, COVID, climate change, we are going to need a non-traditional foreign policy. We need a solidarity-based foreign policy, one that uses its power to include, to lift up, to transform, to unify, and to move to action. Traditionally, foreign policy has been about power over, the assertion of either military or economic might over other lands, peoples, races, resources, and religions. An acquisitive proposition, or at the very least, a competitive one. Raping and pillaging and plundering, the building or scaling of walls. Ours is about building bridges, about power together, about using the levers of power within foreign policy to include, to recenter around common values, a shared vision of a more feminist future in which basic human needs are met, the promotion of human and planetary flourishing. That's our vision at the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative, a shared space for feminists inside and outside of government who are working to innovate, to experiment, and to learn in our shared journey toward this ideal. For those of you who haven't heard of us, we opened our virtual doors in January of this year, but have been incubating this work in partnership with most of you for about 5 years. There are now more than 100 organizations coming along with us and a growing group of governments, several of whom you will hear from today. And we're grateful to every single one of you who shared your perspectives, resources, and insights that helped to inform our 2023 edition of the Defining Feminist Foreign Policy paper series. Most of all, I am grateful to our small but scrappy team of Spogmay Ahmed, Jill Montilla, and Beatriz Silva, most of whom you will hear from today, and all of whom were authors deeply involved in the crafting of this text. They are deep thinkers, vision weavers, true believers, and most of all, they are lovely and kind. I'm so lucky to work with them every day and to learn from them, and to have spent the last few months researching, consulting, conversing, and writing about the latest going-ons in the now 16 governments who have dared to declare their foreign policy feminist. The results of that effort are elucidated in the paper, which is available on our website, and if you're in the room, on the QR codes that are around. What did we learn? You're about to find out. Because whether you're in my class or in the collaborative, our experiment is about learning and exchange, developing theories and testing them. Do the things that we say are solutions actually work? On this topic, I once opened one of our Chatham House Rule convenings asking government colleagues to talk about 3 successes and 1 challenge. And she joked, more like 10 failures and 1 success. That may sound harsh, but when you've set up a definition of feminist foreign policy that is as ambitious as ours is, and I will note, because we're in Washington and people care about these things, it's not just us. The Council on Foreign Relations recently released a paper that also said feminist foreign policy is the most ambitious version of gender and foreign affairs. So it's not just us. But when you define a feminist foreign policy as we do, as something more than simply women-y foreign policy, it's really hard to do, particularly in today's world. And here's a little secret. This is a journey that is as much about the process as it is about the product. It's a long and winding pathway on which one never fully arrives, but only iterates and learns forward together and makes a lot of friends along the way. So that's what we're doing this morning. We're going to listen, learn, celebrate some successes, and be kind and supportive as we hear about our failures. We're interested more in learning from them than we are counting them. It's going to be an incredible conversation. You're going to hear from some of the activists and advisors who have helped us to craft this vision and definition and framework for feminist foreign policy, two tools that we're still using today and which we're grateful to hear several government counterparts have found helpful in their crafting of their policies. You're going to hear from the government colleagues themselves who are going to give us a little bit of a reality check on how hard it actually is to do this. But first, we're going to hear from Bia. She is a George Washington University student. She is our favorite paid intern, and she's going to kick us off. Welcome, Bia.
Good morning, buenos dias, bom dia, y bonjour. My name is Beatriz. Some of you might know me as Bia, and I use she, her pronouns. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you today, either in person and on Zoom. And before I begin, I would like to invite Noah Edelman, who is here representing the Students for Indigenous and Native American Rights, to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Noah. I'm the Vice President of GW Students for Native American Rights group. And I'd like to thank Bia and everybody for the invitation. I just want to say a few words about the land run right now. So acknowledging the continuance of life on colonized land is important, and many people are still unaware to the extent to which Native peoples are stripped of their lands in this country. And that being said, Washington is situated on the ancestral homelands of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples, as well as sharing close proximity to the ancestral lands of the Pamunkey peoples. Today, roughly 4,000 Indigenous people live and thrive in DC. There's good reasons to be educated about Native peoples of this land, and acknowledging the land run is an important step. So thanks again for having me, and please feel free to reach out to GW Sign online for any questions and want to learn more about what we're doing here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. Let's get started with some housekeeping. This event offers live translation in ASL, French, and Spanish. If you are here in person and would like to access the live translation, feel free to scan that QR code right there to log into the Zoom link on your phone or your computer and listen in while you watch. To access the translation, you should click the globe icon on the bottom of your screen and select your preferred language. Those of you who are here in person can help those who need the translation understand us better by clapping quietly. I will show you how, and we can practice together. This is a silent clap. Let's see you guys do it. Good job. That way, our speakers will feel appreciated, and our listeners and our translators will have clear audio. And finally, after the panel discussion, we will have time for questions from the audience, both online and on Zoom. You can feel free to send a question in the comments. A little bit more about me. I am here today wearing two hats, like Lyric said. The first one is the intern hat. I am the collaborative's first, only, and favorite intern. And I have been working here with our tiny but mighty team on this event and this paper since March. And a fun fact is that today, the 15th, marks exactly 5 months since I joined the team. This team full of kind, wonderful, and hardworking women. My second hat is the student hat. I'm a student here at GW, and I'm also a member of the Student Consortium on Women, Peace, and Security, which is a wonderful student-led organization that has been an amazing partner throughout the process of planning this event. You might have seen some of them in the check-in table, standing in the room, taking photos. So let's please give them a silent round of applause. Good job. You learned so fast. They are kindly volunteering here today. So thank you to the consortium people who are here today. What you will get to see today is the fruit of months of work from our team and our government partners and our civil society partners. We could not be here without them today. As a student and a very early career professional, if you could call me that, it has been an honor to work on this paper. The fight for gender equality is difficult and tiring, and the other students in the room know that it's difficult to be young and look to the future with hope. But working alongside people who mean business when they say they want to make the world a better place can feel like a breath of fresh air. Our opening speaker, whom I have the honor to introduce, is one of those people. Her Excellency Ambassador Marita Perceval is the Ambassador for Feminist Foreign Policy for Argentina. She previously served in a number of roles at the Argentine Republic, including Secretary of Equality and Diversity Policies in the Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity, Undersecretary of International Cooperation on the Ministry of Education, and Undersecretary for the Promotion of Human Rights. She also oversaw the coordination of the 15th Regional Conference on Women in Latin America and the Caribbean for UN Women. She has also served as the UNICEF Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, and she was the first female permanent representative of the Argentine Republic to the United Nations. Quite an impressive list of positions. Please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Ambassador Marita Perceval.
Well, very proud to be here with you at this moment in this place. Thank you, Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative. Really, I say not only a strong organization, but a necessary commitment. Thank you, lady. Thank you, Spogmay. Thank you, distinguished panelists. Thank you, all of you present in this honorable room of the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. And thank you, our friends that are following us through Zoom, and particularly to my friend Mabel Bianco. You know her very well. She cannot be with us today, so Mabel, all my sorority. Saying that, allow me to share with you some opening remarks. When the Latin American people will say, Sam, you have to take care. In just a few hours, the high-level segment of the 78th session of the UN General Assembly will be a decisive milestone on the path to achieving the 2030 agenda and the urgent need to put the 17 SDGs back on track. There, the international community will look at itself in the mirror and see itself reflected as a world that faces multiple cascaded crises and an existential challenge, from the certainty that climate collapse has already begun, to the increase in tensions and the accentuation of conflicts, from the data that shows an unnecessary increase in hunger and the highest military spending in the last 8 decades, to the fact that the global inflation rate is the highest in the last 40 years, from the lack of regulation of new technologies to the exacerbation of the care crisis, and the evidence that in the year 2020, an estimated 287,000 women died during pregnancy, childbirth, or the aftermath, according to our new data, from the unacceptable evidence that while the generated wealth generated since 2020 globally, almost double that of the remaining 99% of humanity, the number of displaced people reached the record number of 110 million. Migration has an urgent global development and human rights challenge, particularly on poor and middle-income countries, and for women and children. And a world in debt puts a horizon of prosperity and dignity at risk, since developing and middle-income countries today spend more on paying off their debts than on helping their people, with global public debt having reached a historical maximum of $92 trillion in 2022. In it, the international community will not be able to remain indifferent, nor pretend that by continuing to do the same things in the same way, or by prolonging inaction, it will be possible to reverse the current regressive trend that threatens any possibility of effectively complying with the SDGs and overcoming the setbacks of recent years that, due to the impact of recurrent and converging crises, have dragged humanity, and the planet to situations prior to 2015, or even worse, the fact that the 90% of country education, life expectancy, or the economy have deteriorated further. That will be the time to renew the commitment assumed by a state adopting the 2030 agenda. It will also be the opportunity to agree to move together and responsible towards an innovative, inclusive, and transformative time in which trust replaces hostility, cooperation replaces confrontation, and solidarity replaces fragmentation. For, as the Secretary General of the United Nations has said, and I quote, "We must urgently restore trust and revitalize multilateralism to promote the power of universal action, the imperative of justice, and the promise of a better future. We need effective international institutions based on the reality of the 21st century, the Charter of the United Nations, and international law, truly universal and truly representative." I end the quote and I add, and a woman as Secretary General. It won't be possible. It won't be possible, all of these dreams without feminism. It won't be fair without us. A feminist foreign policy is necessary so that sustainable development, peace, and human rights are not a chimera, and so that inequality is not a dead end for more than half of humanity. A feminist foreign policy is necessary so that it does not take 300 years for the demands of all women and girls to be heard and all their rights recognized. A feminist foreign policy is urgent to put an end to hate speech, anti-gender, and anti-rights narratives and movements, backlash waves. It is essential to create a global scenario where feminist foreign policy gains ground as a regulatory framework, political strategy, and innovative instrument aimed at rethinking international relations from an approach that places human rights, the redistribution of power, the sustainability of life, and gender equality at the center as essential pillars of an action plan that works for the people, the planet, and the future. A strategic feminist foreign policy, because just as the economic or environmental dimension or the human rights approach cannot be absent in these debates, neither can the gender agenda and the feminist purpose continue to be silenced or invisibilized in decision-making processes. Because if transforming this gloomy context is a pending task of our time, achieving substantive gender equality and achieving the autonomy and empowerment of all women and girls in their diversity constitutes the greatest challenge that the world faces in terms of true peace, sustainable development, and concrete universal human rights. Because from feminist foreign policy, we must generate broad networks and establish alliances between governmental, parliamentarian, justice, decision-maker, diverse feminist and trans-feminist movements, intercultural, intergenerational, post-colonial, transnational, and multilateral organizations, human rights defenders, pacifists, environmentalist thinkers, creators, ancestors, artists, and craftswomen, scientists and technologists, Afro women, rural women, indigenous women, people living with disabilities, migrant displaced women and refugees, community and religious leaders, communicators, business women and entrepreneurs. We need with us the 51% of the humanity to make real the feminist foreign policy, an ambitious and concrete feminist foreign policy. We must all get involved and make the I am because we are, which inspires Colombia's Ubuntu philosophy. We must all get involved and make the I am because we are a reality. Promote the full participation of women in decision-making spaces and in all international fora, all, not just the women fora. promote emancipatory actions aimed at transforming the existing hierarchies of power and the privilege that are reproduced in the international arena, and condition the results of a foreign action that puts peace and security at risk, prevents sustainable development, hinders the full exercise of human rights, and perpetuates gender inequalities, violence, and systemic discrimination against women, adolescents, girls, LGBTIQ people in their diversity. Address the transnational dimension of gender inequalities and correct asymmetry through regional and international cooperation. Encourage a future agenda that puts people and the planet at the center, revalues the ethics and the right of care, and invests in systems and policies that prioritize the sustainable and dignity of life, of all lives. Finally, really, I read the very interesting document, Defining Feminist Foreign Policy, the 2023 edition by Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative during the night. Yes. So, but really, I'm very happy, not only because I'm pleased because you recognize our effort in Argentina, but particularly because you see strategically feminist foreign policy as an instrument to forge equality. I want to draw attention to some authors, perhaps also feminists, who highlight the fact that there is no unequivocal definition of feminist foreign policy, and that this could translate into a weakness, or at least a risk that could lead to turning it into something vaporous, ambiguous, or merely testimonial. This narrative is not naive, and it can become a trap for us to stop the advance of strategic findings that feminism achieves, as is the adoption of a feminist foreign policy as a powerful, innovative instrument for a better world. In that sense, the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative Report is a powerful document and a meaningful response to those criticisms, proposing a solid and coherent conceptual framework that gives clarity to what we understand as feminist foreign policy. Feminist foreign policy is not a new abstract concept to do nothing, nor a new ethical or normative abstract principle, but rather an operational category that connotes an instrumental power and denotes a transformative capacity that is carried out through policies and actions guided by an objective that is none other than to ensure that the human rights of all women, adolescents, and girls are recognized, respected, protected, and exercised always and everywhere, and that gender equality is specifically universal, legal, and real. Our principles and regulatory framework are reflected in international law on the rights of women and girls, and international humanitarian law, as well in other international human rights instruments and current international agreements. Therefore, feminist foreign policy should not invent the wheel. We should not invent the agenda, nor build a sophisticated legal framework to exist. Our responsibility is to decisively contribute to making the agreed agendas and the internationally consecrated rights effective reality. Gender equality is a question of power. And this is why we need to be together in this mission. Gender equality is a question of power in a patriarchal world, and also in a patriarchal international relations and international fora. In this sense, feminist foreign policy can be evaluated by its effectiveness in advancing objectives, by its capacity to accelerate achievements, and by its courage to not allow regressivity and encourage inclusive progressivity, concrete universality, and fair intersectionality to make an equality that does not yet exist for all women, adolescents, and girls. Not for something else, but for all these. We are ready to work together on the 5 R's: rights, representation, resources, research, and reporting, and I add results. Results for all women, adolescents, and girls in their diversity, and for the entire humanity and the planet. Feminist foreign policy, a right for that mission. Thank you very much.
Well, that's the vision. And we're grateful to you, Madam Ambassador, for traveling here to be with us. We're so inspired by what we're seeing in your country as well as in the region. As you'll see in the paper, Latin America really is the region to watch in feminist foreign policy. I think that's one of the most exciting developments as we've been charting the course of this trajectory since the first feminist foreign policy, which was Sweden in 2014. Niche, Nordic was the global reception. Now you're just as likely to be from Latin America as you are from Europe if you have a feminist foreign policy. And that point about the backlash, I think, is very important because we can learn from the green wave. We can learn from our sisters in Latin America how to actually make wins instead of regress. So we're grateful to you. We're grateful to you for hosting the first ever Latin America regional convening last month and for the declaration that came out of that. I joked with Spogmay, we got that yesterday, introducing the already out-of-date Defining Feminist Foreign Policy 2023. We're going to dig into that in the panel now, and it's my real pleasure to introduce someone that I have learned a lot from and worked with very deeply on a number of feminist agendas, from the United Nations to feminist foreign policy, the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative Senior Policy Advisor, Spogmay Ahmed. You will come introduce the panel, and we are also going to call you up as well and do a quick set change with some waters here. So Spogmay, take it away.
Thank you, Lyric, and hello, everyone. I want to first echo my colleagues in saying thank you so much for joining us. We've been so looking forward to this event. This paper has been a months-long endeavor, so we're really grateful to have you all with us here in the room and a full house online as well. The 2023 edition of our Defining Feminist Foreign Policy paper is our most extensive yet. So before we begin the panel, I'll just provide a couple of updates on our key findings. So this paper covers a record 16 governments who engaged with feminist foreign policy over the past 2 years. In Europe, these span France, Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Scotland, Spain, Slovenia, and Sweden. In the Americas, Argentina, Canada, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, Mongolia in Central Asia, Liberia in West Africa, and Libya in the Middle East. So several key findings have emerged from our analysis. Firstly, feminist foreign policy is officially a global trend present across all 5 United Nations regions. As you can see in the slide here, when we last conducted this analysis, just 7 governments had announced feminist foreign policies. Now, as of 2023, that number has more than doubled. And as we heard in the remarks prior to mine, Latin America and the Caribbean, with rising momentum, has been one to watch. There has even been interest in feminist foreign policy at the subnational level, with governments like Scotland making commitments. This growing cohort of feminist foreign policy governments offers compelling potential for multilateral cooperation. We have the first group of member states, co-led by the governments of Chile and Germany, advancing feminist foreign policy at the United Nations. Argentina hosted the first regional convening in Latin America a few weeks ago, as you just heard. As a bloc, feminist foreign policy governments, we believe, can push for progressive outcomes in multilateral spaces, counter the rise of anti-rights actors, and urge policy and institutional reforms that can sustain change in support of gender equality. Across feminist movements, we have an increasingly diverse and intersectional understanding of what feminist foreign policy looks like in practice. For example, this July, the African Feminist Collective on Feminist-Informed Policies released its own statement of intent, calling for an interrogation of global power dynamics. From Australia to Mexico to Germany, civil society coalitions pushing this agenda exist or are emerging. Globally, movements are planting the seeds to collective action that we hope will bear fruit in the years to come. On thematics, many governments are united in prioritizing key issue areas, including peace and security, eliminating gender-based violence, promoting sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice, and increasingly addressing climate change. Governments like Chile are bringing light to structural issues like trade and macroeconomics. Governments like Argentina are introducing newer issues like ethics and artificial intelligence to the feminist foreign policy discourse. Governments like Germany are explicitly declaring a post-colonial approach to their development policy. Others, like Colombia, are challenging traditional conceptions of what militarization and security look like by advancing a total peace agenda. And some issue areas like migration, anti-discrimination, and breaking down systemic racism stand to be much improved. On resourcing, governments set ambitious goals for increasing funding for gender equality. And within the OECD DAC, Canada and the Netherlands lead the feminist foreign policy cohort in devoting the highest share of their official development assistance to gender equality and for resourcing women's rights organizations and ending gender-based violence. Civil society has been calling for co-creation of this agenda, recognizing that if feminist foreign policy, or any foreign policy rather, is to be successful, it must engage directly with the communities it is most likely to impact. Governments have organized global consultations with feminist activists and academics in response. Others, like France, Spain, and Colombia, took these recommendations further, establishing advisory boards to ensure ongoing independent analysis. And despite impressive progress in 2 years, threats to this agenda are more pertinent than ever. Elections are looming in at least 4 feminist foreign policy countries, and in some cases, right-wing parties are serious contenders. Late last year, the so-called mother of the movement, Sweden, elected a right-wing coalition government that quickly relinquished its 8-year commitment to feminist foreign policy, sending shockwaves globally. Anti-rights and anti-gender movements are on the rise, and global crises, from climate change and disaster to conflict, continue to erode human rights and progress toward gender equality. 2 years ago, together with civil society and government partners, we worked together to develop an operationally oriented framework for designing feminist foreign policies. This global framework, which we have now available in 6 languages, provides a number of shorter and medium-term steps that can serve as entry points to designing transformative policies. We also distilled a global definition, which I know is lengthy. It's identifying key elements and hopefully inspiring increased ambition and action. Our framework names 5 illustrative measures of success, or 5 Rs, which serve as the basis for analysis in our Defining Feminist Foreign Policy paper. They include rights, resources, representation, research and reporting, and reach, or the extent to which feminist principles are applied across all levers of foreign policy and in domestic policy as well. Like much of our work at the Collaborative, this paper has been a global effort. We've received input from governments and civil society organizations across feminist foreign policy countries in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. So I want to take this moment to acknowledge all of their contributions. Their names and affiliations are listed in the paper. As you read the paper, we're grateful for your thoughts, feedback, suggestions for improvement, and the sharing of your own resources, as we know that this is just one publication among many in a field of growing scholarship and expertise around the world. So I'll close this portion by urging us not to dwell on the challenges that I named, but to celebrate progress by making more, and to ground ourselves in the experiences of those who could not join us, but whose lives motivate this work every day. And also with a call to action. If you have the capacity, please continue to support feminist researchers, particularly in the Global South, whose work will help to sustain this agenda and determine strategies to navigate pushback in difficult times. So with that, it is my absolute honor to moderate today's panel discussion with 4 women who I deeply admire. I'm joined today in the room by Beth Roniuk, Vice President of Policy at the Equality Fund, and Karen Burbach, Head of the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Task Force of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and online, Mabel Bianco, founder and president of Fundación para Estudio y Investigación de la Mujer, and Yvette Kathurima, manager for equity, gender, and youth and at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. With that, I'd like to invite my panelists to join me at the front of the room, and we can kickstart our conversation. Well, welcome again. I have been so excited for this portion of the event, and I actually want to start with Mabel, who is joining us online. So those who are online will be able to see Mabel, but for those in the room, you will just hear her voice. So a voice of wisdom, or divine voice, so to say, but she has lots of wonderful insights, I'm sure, to share. So Mabel, across Latin America, the rise in feminist foreign policies has followed, to some extent, the green wave of abortion rights wins throughout the region. At the same time, anti-gender and anti-rights movements have been gaining prominence, but Latin America's success in proclaiming a progressive agenda has thus far been a key lesson learned. So what can the world learn from Latin America, and how to resist rising backlash, and how to achieve real policy change for women's rights within a contentious environment? Mabel, off to you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good night. Sorry I couldn't be with you for some personal problems, but I'm very happy to be able to participate online. As you know, in our region, specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean, the feminist movement is strong and very well organized since many, many years. That's why we have been fighting so much to obtain all the women's rights, and specifically the access to safe abortion, because for us, maternal mortality and the issue of complications of unsafe abortion is still a problem we need to fight, and we are really trying to obtain the most as much as we could. And in these last years, we moved from only to have safe abortion access in 2 countries, only in Guyana and Uruguay. Now we are having in much more, and we are very happy that the last one was some days ago, was Mexico. Because as you know, this is a problem we need to ensure. And that's why I think the feminist foreign policy grows in our America soon, and we could have in these last years, as you mentioned, Spogmay, and is in the paper, many countries, more than when we start some years ago. I'm very happy to be all in this and working with you so many years. But now I'm happy that at least most, and we have 5 countries that are having this policy, and there are some others that are coming soon. So what we can learn from the feminist movement? we learned that we couldn't stop our fight in the streets, in the media, in everywhere. Meanwhile, we obtain something, we need to continue fighting. And for the feminist foreign policy, I think this is something that goes very well and very, how we say, in accordance in what we have been fighting. For example, we have in Latin America and the Caribbean, the consensus of Montevideo that is this year, we are celebrating the 10 years. This is a regional conference organized by ECLAC that we did in 2013, in which we approved the most progressive agenda. Meanwhile, there were very different in our countries, but all of them accepted. Now, this is the translation to the feminist foreign policy. Why? Because we need to ensure that these policies that we are respecting and pushing for respect and maintain and increase the respect could be not only at a national, but at a regional and global level. So to be together in the feminist foreign policy is a must for the feminists. Why? Because we need to ensure these are realities. We know there is growing all those movements against, but we know we are the majority, and we could, if we maintain, sustain, and we continue pushing at national, regional, global level, this is not going to be a backlash. But for this, we need to say that we are not receiving now so much support, specifically from donors. Now, Latin America and the Caribbean is not so much or so well recognized as a region in which we need support, and specifically the women groups, because we are still giving our time and our efforts to maintain. The green wave, as we call the fight for the abortion, is not only for abortion, because as you know, for example, in Argentina, the young people specifically, but most of us, we use the green scarf in our hands to demonstrate that we are promoting.
We lost Mabel's audio. Okay, so we'll move on and wait for her to reconnect, but really appreciate those remarks and grounding us not only in the power of grassroots activism, but how to translate that activism to national and global level policymaking as well. So I'm going to shift the conversation now to Beth. Beth, one of the key elements of our analysis has been on resourcing the feminist foreign policy agenda. So from your perspective as a feminist funder, how can countries better invest in feminist foreign policy, and what are some good examples or best practices?
Thank you, Spogmay, and congratulations on the publication. I think it's a great step forward. And I'd also like to thank Bea and Noah for the land acknowledgement. I think that this is to acknowledge where we are standing and who has walked this land since time immemorial is very important as we move forward. I'm wondering if people have seen this social media trend called girl math, where if you pay for something on a prepaid card, it's free. If you return a shirt that costs $50 and you buy a new one that costs $75, it really only costs you $25. I think, I won't get into the discussion of whether this is infantilizing women or whether it's funny, but I think it's provoking a really important discussion around money, because I think this is key to feminist organizing, and I think it's really key to feminist foreign policy. We know that governments invest where it's important. So if you want to know what's a priority, you follow the money. I want to make two quick points. It's great to follow on from Mabel because she was highlighting why money for feminist organizations is really important. And we're seeing more and more research of how women's rights organizations, LGBTQ organizations are drivers of change. And we know that they drive change on gender equality. We know that there's a strong correlation of a strong feminist movement with progress addressing sexual and gender-based violence, with land titling, with progress on sexual reproductive health and rights. But we're also seeing growing evidence that strong, independent, well-financed feminist movements make gains on other social, political, and economic areas. We've got long-standing research on when independent women's movements are part of peace agreements, the peace accords last longer. We're seeing the importance of strong independent women's movements in the fight back against authoritarianism and anti-democracy. So this is absolutely as a key piece in feminist foreign policies. And we see feminists asking for an increase in these investments, but also in how the money moves. It's not just the amount of money, it's the conditions and the red tape and the bureaucracy attached to this. And I think there are a number of really interesting examples that we can learn from. I'm very pleased to be joined with Karen from the government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, because the Netherlands has been a real leader in pushing this agenda with innovative funding initiatives like Leading from the South that actually decenters the locus of funding to a number of women's funds based in the global South. I think another positive example, I'm very quick to criticize my own government, the government of Canada, but I do think that the contribution that was made in 2019 to the Equality Fund, where I work, a little bit of self-interest, a little plug here. But that was a significant investment. It was one of the largest investments by a government in a mechanism to fund feminist movements that's ever been made. And as Mabel was saying, these kinds of investments are absolutely crucial in this moment because of the anti-rights movement, the rollback of rights that we're seeing. We have to keep talking about this because of the pressures on international assistance dollars. There are many demands on those dollars. As the ambassador was talking, the amounts that are needed to make progress on the SDGs, on the Sustainable Development Goals, dwarf what is currently being spent. And in that context, it was very disappointing to see the latest data on funding for women's rights organizations by international assistance donors in the last period actually dropped. So in this moment, when we're seeing increased urgency, the short-term trend is dropping. And then just quickly on the last point, I think the other kind of resources that we need are resources inside governments to advance this agenda. We need to see investments in analytical capacity, in research, in data to track change, in building out how to do evaluation and monitoring in feminist ways. So I think we may see girl math happening around us, but I think maybe what we also need to call for is a new feminist foreign policy math that will help us advance this agenda.
Thank you so much, Beth. I love the idea of FFP math. Just to reiterate that resourcing is such an important part of this agenda. It's one of the 5 illustrative measures of success by which we analyze countries' progress in our report. So really appreciate you giving such tangible examples of policies and programs already in place that hopefully other governments can contribute to or emulate. I'm going to go back to our online panelists and ask Yvette a question. So Yvette, as we explore in our paper, the discourse on feminist foreign policy is increasingly diverse and intersectional. Advocates and researchers across the world, and in the African continent in particular, have been a driving force in this evolution. Can you tell us more about these efforts, and what do you believe has been left out of the common discourse on feminist foreign policy that needs to be front and center? Yvette, off to you.
Thank you so much, Spogmay. And I just wanted to echo the previous speakers in congratulating the FFPC team, the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative team, on this paper. So as a former student of international relations, the evolution in the FFP discourse, feminist foreign policy discourse, has been quite interesting. From the power over approach that Lyric previously mentioned, that actually emphasized economic and military dominance, to policies that are informed by feminist principles that advance societies, where people and the environment can flourish, and where we can investigate the impact of the international political economy, particularly on structurally excluded populations. Even as this narrative continues to evolve, we've seen that some feminists have questioned whether we should continue to use the term feminist foreign policy, and if the current discourse is actually challenging power and calling out the missing voices of the historically excluded groups. So as you introduced Spogmay, the statement of intent on feminist-informed policies abroad and at home, which was released in July by the African Feminist Collective on Feminist-Informed Policies, calls out for an interrogation of these global power dynamics that we saw in traditional international relations, looks at increased funding for local research and knowledge production, and the need for in-depth discussions, particularly in the current context, where we have to unpack militarization and the growth of this in certain countries, climate change, and the impact of migration, both on foreign and domestic policies. We also recognize that because these issues are increasingly more urgent and globally intertwined, they have to be integrated in all the conversations around feminist foreign policy. I have to call out Memory Kachambwa, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, who has previously been quoted as saying that the discussions around feminist foreign policy are not foreign to the act we propose. What do we need to look out to? Continued collaboration and co-creation with civil society, especially those from the global south, in the development of feminist-informed foreign policies is critical. This is non-negotiable and must continue as we go forward. Additionally, we could explore innovative ideas. So Aya Chebi, who's the previous AU envoy for youth, has talked about the impact of migration and has proposed listening tours, for example, to inform immigration policies. And as we look forward to a broader understanding of what we term as feminist foreign policy or feminist-informed policies, we could rely on philosophies, like Ubuntu that Ambassador Marita highlighted, that promote humanity to others. Additionally, we must elevate existing tools because we've heard from Abel around what's happening in Latin America. We know that existing tools exist on the African continent, such as the African Feminist Charter and the Maputo Protocol. So look for initiatives and ways to elevate this so that we can advance implementation of our feminist principles within feminist-informed policies. Thanks, Spogmay.
Thank you so much, Yvette. I want to reiterate so many of the great points you made. Firstly, that so much scholarship on feminist foreign policy has emerged from the global north, but there are so many researchers and advocates working on this issue, many of whom are our partners. So appreciate you calling out Memory Kachambwa, who unfortunately could not join us today, and Aya Chebi, both of whom have commented on this issue. And also the point you made about evaluating existing tools. So many frameworks for human rights and gender equality exist not only at the global level, but at the regional level as well. So appreciate the call out to the African Charter. And as we heard earlier, many frameworks exist in the Latin America region as well. So I'm gonna direct my next question to Karen. Karen, the countries covered in our analysis are all at different stages of foreign policy drafting, development, and implementation. One of our key learnings has been that the process for how a feminist foreign policy is formed, who's involved, how open and inclusive it is just as important as the product itself. So can you tell us more about your journey toward a feminist foreign policy in the Netherlands, your plans to co-create this agenda with civil society, and perhaps what you've learned from the cohort of FFP countries?
Thank you so much, Spogmay, and congratulations to the collaborative for this wonderful and important paper on feminist foreign policy. And I think it's a good thing that it's already outdated, because it means that developments go very fast, and that's important. Also, I want to recognize the trailblazers and the trendsetters, because this journey towards a feminist foreign policy and a more equal society has been ongoing for centuries. And I think all of us know important examples close by and far away, feminist examples who keep inspiring us every day to keep moving and to keep going forward in shaping feminist foreign policy, but also feminism in a broader sense. I think for us, our story was also very much civil society enhanced, and also based on the wonderful example set by Sweden, the first country to actually announce a feminist foreign policy. In the Netherlands, questions were asked by the Senate to our government to explore whether a feminist foreign policy would have added value for our foreign policy. A study was done into whether there was indeed added value, especially also because the Netherlands was already known for progressive stance on women's rights, gender equality, and of course also SRHR as an important part of that. The study basically said that yes, there would be added value, because also in the Dutch policy there are many gaps, and those gaps need to be filled. When you look at our development cooperation, for example, women's rights, gender equality was part and parcel, but there's many areas within foreign policy, also already mentioned by Beth and by Mabel, that could benefit from more ambition in this field. And then the question arises what to do with the word feminist, the F word, really, because for so many, maybe amongst us, it's rather clear what feminism means, but this is not to be taken for granted. We experience every day. There are so many images and ideas about what feminism is. And we need to keep explaining the why and the what whilst doing it, actually. So we need to work in a feminist way. We need to implement and shape our feminist foreign policy. And we have to keep explaining why it is necessary and what it means. And for me, I especially love the conversations between my father and my eldest daughter about this issue, because they are exemplary of the necessity of this debate. Our two ministers at the time decided to be politically very bold, which I think was important. It was a male and a female. And especially for a male minister, it's not an easy thing to say, yes, let's go feminist. So I really have to give him kudos for that. Also, I have to mention that now, for the first time in over 200 years, we have two women at the helm of our ministry, and I'm really quite happy with that and proud of that. So courage is necessary. We all know that politics is tough on the national stage and definitely also internationally. The pushback has been mentioned several times, and the multiple crises that are taking place have been mentioned many times. And we often see that when multiple crises occur, or a single crisis for that matter, women's rights and gender equality are seen as a nice to and not a need to. And this is something that we need to maintain focus on as well. So the decision was taken to go feminist. And then the question is really, how do you do this? And there's of course several ways. You need flagships. because you need to put it on the agenda. You need to show why it's important. You need to be ambitious about the word and make sure that it's resonating everywhere. But you also need to work on, and that's tough work, on institutionalizing the concept of diving deep into your own organization and showing what is needed to actually become more feminist. In my ministry, in our ministry, Lisa's here as well, there was an qualitative research done into racism within our ministry. And the findings were that actually racism was institutionalized within our ministry, and that sent shockwaves through our institution, and still is sending shockwaves. And it's necessary, it's important, it's painful, and I'm really happy that this is out in the open and a matter of discussions almost daily. Also, we are doing a qualitative research into the glass ceiling that everybody knows about. Why is it that apart from now in a very comfortable feminist bubble, we usually are surrounded by men? And why is it that in these conversations that there's not so many men? And I'm shouting out to the men that are here, because we cannot do this all by ourselves. We need men to also see the benefits of feminism. So that deep dive into our own organization was very important. And then obviously the consultations with civil society, both in the Netherlands and definitely also abroad. Leading from the South was already mentioned, our incredible partners from 4 women's funds and many more organizations that we try to reach. And I'm sure that we didn't reach everybody, and we feel horrible for that, but we know that they find their way to us, and they make sure that we get their viewpoints as well. And we are also always grateful for that. And based on those consultations, we made sure that we would follow the 3 R's initially set by Sweden, and we added a 4th one, the reality check, making sure that what we do actually results in the impact we want to reach. Which also sometimes means that we will not be shouting the word feminism off the roof, because you want to reach impact. And sometimes if the word stands in the way of you and the impact, you need to be pragmatic about it and work around. I fear I'm speaking too long, so I'll round up about the lessons learned. It's a journey, it's a process. It's been said before. It hasn't just begun. It's been ongoing for a long while, and it won't end soon. We need flexibility, we need resilience, we need evidence, and we need activism. And we need care. We need to care for each other or for ourselves, and make sure that we keep going. As I said before, we need to keep explaining the why and the how. And we need to keep explaining that it's not just only a rights issue, but it's a security issue as well. We need to keep explaining why sexual and reproductive health and rights is a matter of rights, and it's a matter of security. What's next? Or shall I wait with that a little bit longer? I'll get to there. I'm too excited to keep going.
Thank you so much, Karen, for highlighting so many stages of the process. And what I really want to highlight from your remarks is just how transformative the role of research was, not just in the adoption of the Netherlands feminist foreign policy, but also in your process as you're learning about how to tackle racism and discrimination within ranks, and also shatter that glass ceiling. So appreciate your honesty there. I'm going to go back to Mabel. So Mabel, you have been a longtime advocate at the United Nations and in a number of multilateral settings like the G7 and the G20. As our paper covers, feminist foreign policy countries now make up a sizable cohort and are organizing themselves in spaces like the UN with the FFP+ group, for example.
So how can feminist foreign policy countries work together in multilateral settings to advance this agenda? And what recommendations do you have? Mabel, off to you.
Thank you, and sorry for the problems with the connection. Well, first of all, I believe now we are in a moment in which it's necessary that we grow quickly in the number of countries that are reaching this agenda and the feminist policy, and that we can work regionally. I think we need to base our efforts in two issues. First of all, to strengthen, as was said before, strengthen the relation between the women's and feminist movement and the governments as much as possible. And second, to regionally consider what are the main issues to build up in order to be concrete and to make the others countries and the other forces that sometimes may be against, as they are, that these are basic, because as we have evidence, the evidence needs to be explained or present clearly. Of course, this is not going to be accepted if we are not fighting. And I think regionally, we can fight better, and then putting together globally are going to be strong. But we need to do that on a very quick way because, for example, I think we need Africa to be strong. They have so many countries there that they could be, so we need to have them on board with us. Also, I think in Asia Pacific. And what this means, that we are growing in the number of countries and we are strengthening our possibilities to work multilaterally, globally. Because as you know, most of our developing countries are globally participating in, for example, the G77. As much as we have those governments and regionally involved in these feminist foreign policies, if you don't want to call feminist, but women's policies in their diversity, whatever it is, so we could be stronger, but we need to grow quickly. And this is why I think we need to make efforts. I'm very happy that we have this first high-level meeting in Buenos Aires with the with the countries from the region, plus Canada, and also Spain coming and some others. So I think we need to do it in a hurry in the others. Why? Because regionally is going to be, I insist, very important. And as I said before, in 2013, when we approved the consensus of Montevideo for our region, it gives for these 10 years the possibility globally to have this agenda and to push globally for this agenda so progressive. So now we are in the issue to improve and actualize it. And I think we need to be clear, not to remain in a way to be conservative of what we win. We need to try to have more, because to preserve what we win is necessary to go further and try to do more. And this is a principle in negotiations. If you don't want to have nothing new, you are not going to advance, or maybe you are losing what you win because there are nothing to negotiate. So I think we have a lot of issues we can negotiate, we can propose globally to advance. And if we are more together, if we are more having these ideas, we are going to be able to win. But we need to increase, and very, very soon, I'm afraid till next March in CSW, we need to duplicate or more the numbers of countries. and have more feminists involved at their national level fighting for this. If we are able to do that, we are going to win. And this is something that we want to win and we want to advance, because the problems are not decreasing, they are increasing. All the crises we have suffered after the pandemic and now with the war and so on, we need to advance more because we came back and we backlash. And so with so many trying to bring us down, we need to go further. So I hope we are going to be able to do that. And we are going to work hard in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also helping our colleagues in the other regions because we need to grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mabel, for really laying out a regional and global advocacy strategy for us. And just echoing your words, we want to win and we want to advance this agenda. So taking that as inspiration to move forward. Beth, I'm going to come back to you. Another key theme highlighted throughout our paper is on policy coherence, or the extent to which feminist principles are applied across all foreign policy priorities and mirrored in domestic policy as well. So what are some of the expectations around policy coherence that get raised with this new momentum on feminist foreign policy, and what are some related challenges?
Policy coherence. I think this is one of the really, really tough issues that confronts implementers of feminist foreign policy. But just I was thinking, about the R words. We have rights, resources, representation, and then the collaborative has added reach and research. And I heard the ambassador talk about results. Karen, you talked about resilience, and Yvette talked about recognition. We've got all of these, and maybe this one for also policy coherence, it's reach in the paper, but it's also routine. How do we make it part of the everyday? It's come up before that in order to be effective, feminist foreign policies can't be a niche issue. They can't be something that you just do some of the time. It's about bringing this analysis across all the areas of foreign policy. But it's not just the analysis, it's in changing how you do what you do with that analysis also. It's the push that then what you do when you analyze the situation, you're going to do something different. The areas, the paper mentions a few where perhaps more work is needed, and I think there are some innovative practices that we can build on. We're starting to see a much stronger analysis of feminist approaches to trade. That you can't fund women's rights organizations and then sign a trade agreement that demolishes or has incredible devastating impacts on a sector that has primarily women workers. That you can't talk about women's human rights in one sector and then maintain discriminatory immigration and refugee policies. There was the discussion of the security sector, which I think poses incredible challenges for us as feminists to go through. We're having discussions in Canada. Is a feminist defense policy possible? Because for many feminists, that poses incredible challenges around militarization, around defense spending. Yet, if you have a feminist foreign policy, this is a discussion that you have to have. We have incredible pressures to get to the 2% of GDP spending on NATO. And is that compatible with a feminist foreign policy? Really, really important discussions to engage in. You can't stand up in the Human Rights Council and talk about land defenders and then give state loans to mining companies that work in those areas. There's huge, these contradictions are real. They're not easy, but they're ones we're going to have to grapple with as we move forward. So it's the policy coherence across all of these issues. And then, as you mentioned, Spogmay, what comes up in many, many discussions, so clear from Global South feminists, but also from feminists inside Global North countries, is the domestic international coherence. You can't just talk about feminist issues in international fora or say it's something we're going to do outside. So raising questions about how is the colonial the colonial past inside countries like Canada or Australia being dealt with? How are we dealing with white supremacy, racism inside our own countries in terms of policies? And kudos to the Dutch ministry for looking at racism inside the foreign ministry. I think that's an example of something that we have to do much more of. We have to be looking at our role as carbon producers globally and the implications of that. So it's that challenge of being coherent internationally and domestically. These are major challenges, and they're challenges for governments. They're challenges for academics in how we talk about foreign policy, what's studied, what's considered normal, what's considered part of the discourse of foreign policy. And here I want to shout out all the hardworking feminist IR theorists, the feminist economists, the Global South researchers who are working really, really hard to build out this theory in ways that challenge, but also work within disciplines. And so as we work to normalize this discourse and to make it part of everyday discussions, of routine discussions of foreign policy. It's an area that needs more work. And I think it's the responsibility of activists. That as activists, we have to be much more specific. We have to be smarter. The work that Mabel is doing and others, we have to be concrete. We can't just say, oh, we want a feminist approach to trade. We have to say, what does that look like? What are we asking our governments to do? What concrete changes are we asking to be put on the agenda? And so I think it takes us to some of the core of the exciting pieces of feminist foreign policy, but some of the really tough issues that we're going to have to grapple with across government, civil society, if we're going to move this agenda forward in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Beth. Really appreciate those comments. So instructive for those of us in advocacy and on the government side as well. So I want to keep diving into the points you've raised earlier about resourcing and ask a question to Yvette online. So Yvette, increasingly, advocates have been raising the potential for feminist foreign policies to address macroeconomic issues like debt and trade. I know this is an area that the Children's Investment Fund Foundation has been supporting. So tell us more about this movement. How do you see linkages with feminist foreign policy? What promise does feminist foreign policy hold for advancing structural change? Yvette, off to you.
The feminists at the Women Deliver conference were unpacking the relationship between debt and tax issues, trade, and looking at how feminist foreign policy can then be an opportunity to enhance some of this conversation, particularly living in the current context of the public crisis, where we appreciate that where previously we would leave macroeconomic issues to the macroeconomists and the experts in that area. We can no longer afford to do that because these are issues that are impacting on our day-to-day. We do appreciate also that in many countries in Africa and beyond, the servicing of debt and privatization of institutions, the commodification of such, has greatly impacted on our abilities and the government's abilities to provide public services such as healthcare, education, leading to increased frustration and conflict from the citizens in increased coups that we are seeing, particularly in West Africa. So the governments that advance feminist foreign policies and feminist-informed policies have expanded and revised their approach to key international relations. So we are seeing gender and trade coming up in the reforms that are currently ongoing in international financial institutions such as the World Bank and IMF. We are also seeing that there's ongoing dialogue and continued conversations around countering colonial legacies when it comes to development policies. Feminists are pushing policies and government practitioners to go further to urge progressive approaches to eliminate debt, calling for climate reparations and demanding the recognition of civil society and feminist movements. And Beth has talked about the importance of this and the impact that we are seeing feminist movements having on development in country. To advance structural change at CIFF, we think of funding at various levels. I'll touch on a few. Funding programs at the national and local levels, and doing so in a way that builds on and supports solutions that are advanced by and owned by communities. Looking at funding both insider and outsider advocacy strategies, and supporting feminist movements as an emerging area of our work. We also recognize the importance of sustained funding for gender equality and are in support of initiatives that call for increased collaboration, particularly between governments and civil society, to influence international norms and increase resources for gender equality. So presently, we are supporting the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative, given its capacity to engage directly with governments, inside and outside advocacy, as well as the strong relationships that have been built within the transnational network that is the Global Partner Network for Feminist Foreign Policy. Additionally, we are increasingly interested, and an emerging field of work is on funding research that originates from the majority world, especially on the impact of gender financing and the transformation that it has presented in country, and how these examples can influence ongoing climate financing discussions as those that are happening within Bridgetown. Thanks, Spogmay.
Thank you, Yvette, for really unpacking what seem like big issues and explaining the real world implications of them. Karen, you were very eager to tell us, so you get the opportunity sooner. I would love for you to take a moment to just share with us what's coming next in the feminist foreign policy world. What are some upcoming events and opportunities you'd like to share, and how can the audience get involved?
Yeah, so as I said, flagships are important because we need to keep shining a bright light on the necessity of advancing feminist foreign policy. So I'm happy that next week in New York, during the United Nations General Assembly, the high-level week, there will be a big event on the 20th on feminist foreign policy with several foreign ministers speaking on the necessity, but also becoming more and more concrete on the, okay, so what's next? What are we going to do next? So that's going to take place next week on the Tuesday afternoon. Also, my amazing team in the Netherlands is working really hard on putting together a international conference, shaping feminist foreign policy. Germany hosted a conference last year in September in Berlin, and we are trying to putting together the next one with mainly civil society shaped through different sessions organized by civil society organizations on the R's, how to specifically drill down on feminist foreign policy. But also we've invited 50 governments to learn from each other, from civil society, to network, to brainstorm on what to do next. And we are still working on our handbook because, as I said before, next to the flagships, you need to institutionalize. And also what Beth drilled down on, you need to change the way you work. You need to start every single policy with a gender analysis in order to make sure that you work in a gender transformative way. So that institutionalization will remain very high on our agenda, and we'll just keep chipping away at that with the help of all of you and the critiques of all of you, which we dearly, dearly welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Very, very exciting few months ahead. So those are all of my questions. So just firstly, well, thank you all so much for your commitment to this work, your generosity in joining us today, and for sharing such valuable insights that you have provided. We are over time, but we do want to take some of the questions that we have. So those online, if you're available until for 15 more minutes. And those in the room, you can stay with us until 1 p.m. if you choose. So those online, we're collecting your questions as they come in through the Zoom. And those in the room, think of your questions. We have some microphones set up on the side, and definitely welcome you to line up or to signal to us. But I want to first just take moderator's privilege and invite a speaker from the floor. So we have Claudia San Martin Cid from the Embassy of Chile who wants to say a few words. So please, there's a microphone up there.
Hi to everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Claudia San Martin. I am a diplomat. I'm working in DC in the Embassy of Chile and on behalf of the Ambassador Juan Gabriel Valdez, who could not attend today. I thank you for your presentation and for the invitation. It was very inspiring. As you mentioned, Chile Feminist Foreign Policy document was officially released this year in June, product of a political decision under the conviction that it had to be consistent, comprehensive, and permanent mandate based on the human rights approach that seeks to strengthen cross-sector tools. Foreign policy guidelines Chile FFP is also described a living document. And today, here it was very clear, no? So it's open to discussion and improvement, of course. So the living nature of this document makes instance such as this so relevant to the discussion. And I want to thank the organization for all the idea. And that have emerged here and ask for their opinion on how to improve the relationships of feminist policies between the process their development in other countries, especially as Mrs. Bianco and Burbach mentioned, the concept of feminist is not clear for all the countries. So thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Claudia. Any speakers want to respond? Great, so we'll move on. So we have hundreds of people actually joining us online. So I want to recognize that this is a global agenda and we really want to make sure that their voices are included. So we've got lots of questions flowing in. So I'll take one and anybody can respond. Big question. Can you explain what is meant by decolonizing policy? Anybody who wants to kickstart, please.
I don't have a definition, and I don't think there's one definition, and I don't think there should be one definition at this point because that's part of the process. I think in the best form, we're talking about some of the questions that we need to be asking around policymaking and who makes policy, whose voices, what's expertise, what's valued, what's counted. I think it's part of that process of reimagining what are the goals, those kinds of turning on its head. And central to a lot of this is one of the key elements in feminist foreign policy, and that's making power visible and discussing and changing power relations. So it's a good question, but it's not a fair question in this particular moment. And I think it's about that whole process, and it's still very much a work in progress. Those would be some of my reflections on that theme.
Thanks, Beth. Anybody online want to respond?
Yes, Spogmay, I could add a little on that. Is in recognition that a lot of development was centered around the division that is global north and global south. So when we talk about decolonization and looking at development from a reimagined point of view, as Beth said, it's really looking at unpacking our sources of knowledge so that we are not wholly dependent or reliant on knowledge systems that are from minority world countries, but also appreciating knowledge systems and initiatives, like I mentioned earlier, that come from Global South countries. So that's one on knowledge production and dissemination. We're also looking at how we advance dichotomies. So advanced or richer countries versus poorer countries, global North, global South, and reimagining that to see that certain instruments of power have been continuously emphasized because of how we do our trade and how we engage in global international relations. So how do we unpack that to reimagine a new way of doing things? That's decolonial practice.
Thank you, Yvette. Just to note that our online participants can stay with us for another 25 minutes or so, but we will lose translation in about 10 minutes. So if you're able to join us, keep your questions coming. I see we have a line in the room, so I'll take one question in the room and then we can take a question online, please.
Thank you so much to everybody for this just incredible overview and coverage of so many issues today. It's overwhelming in a good way. I'm a bit nervous to raise something which adds maybe to the complexity. It's maybe a critique and maybe a call for solidarity. I work for Help Age International, the organization that supports older people's organizations around the world. We work with many women's rights, older women's rights activists, and I'm thinking of their voices and they're trying to encourage me to speak. The slight concern that we have is about the roots of much feminist foreign policy in sectors or segments which have age caps and which therefore discriminate against older women who have experienced multiple and compounding discriminations throughout their life. So for example, in SRHR, the indicator for SDG 5.1 stops concerning itself with whether women can make informed choices about their sexual and reproductive health and rights at the age of 49. I'm 48 now, and I worked for SRHR for much of my life, and I'm slightly intimidated that I'm only counted for one more year, and I'm going to make the most of it, but I'd like it to carry on. So that's my request to you for any comment or insight or advice for us, these wonderful older women's rights activists around the world. What could I tell them that you say to us here? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to take that?
I can take that question, but I don't have an answer. I think it's an incredibly important point. And I would encourage you to keep raising it because it's especially also those issues that if, in my view, we want to be truly feminist, we need to definitely reckon, especially also with that. I know that there's a lot of focus also in my country on youth. We have a Youth at Heart strategy, but we need to be inclusive of everybody, regardless of also age. I'm 50, so I would be, I don't count anymore. But thank you very much for raising. It's an extremely important issue.
Thanks. So we have a lot of questions coming in online, so I'm going to just take this one. Current Sustainable Development Goal reports and statistics reveal that many countries still do not have the capacity to collect and report on gender disaggregated data, and therefore the global picture of progress is often incomplete. So as we've been highlighting this data weakness for decades now, what emphasis is feminist foreign policy giving to this major issue? Anybody online or in person want to answer that?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, it's a key element in terms of internal capacities of governments to be able to understand, document, and then move forward. That doesn't mean that it's going to be solved overnight. I think as the SDG snapshots and the information that's coming out for the discussion next week, and as the question points out, these are long-standing gaps. They take time. There's biases in even how national statistical offices work. And so it's a long-standing issue. I think it's an important element in feminist foreign policies. But like so many of them, it's not one that has an easy and quick fix solution. And it's one that we'll just have to keep plugging away at and trying to make progress.
Absolutely. Next in person.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this really interesting discussion. My name is Saskia Brechtmacher. I'm a researcher at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I wanted to follow up on the point that I think Beth made about discussions happening in Canada around what does it mean to have a feminist defense policy. I think this is really important because, as you said, in so many countries, there's pressure now to increase defense spending. I'm from Germany, and that's certainly been the case even as the new feminist foreign policy framework has been adopted. So I was wondering if any of you could reflect a little bit on that tension and what measures have you seen, or to what extent have you seen governments that have adopted a feminist foreign policy take this framework to the security sector, take this framework to the defense ministries, and what have those discussions looked like? Have we seen any changes in how these countries think about defense? Thank you.
Great question. Anybody want to tackle it?
I can try to say a little bit about it because also, of course, in my country, having announced a feminist foreign policy, but also as part of the NATO alliance, wanting to uphold our 2% GDP promise, the budget 2% to go to the defense spending. In a way, for me, also both are valid. The war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine has brought war back on the European continent and very close to home. And I think there's a very broad support also in the Netherlands to that increasing of spending on defense. But it also, I think, at the same time brought to light the necessity of a feminist foreign policy. Because if you look at Russia today, and if you look at the fact that there are more and more authoritarian regimes worldwide, I think that also underlines the necessity of shoring up support for women's rights and gender equality, for actually highlighting why SDG 5 is crucial for democracy, for freedom. So in a very, strange way, for me, both are actually rather valid. And unfortunately, the world today is showing that quite nastily in a way.
Thanks, Karen. Anybody else want to take that one?
Sorry.
No, just asking if anybody else wants to hop in as well online. Great. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Just very briefly, I can't at this moment, of course, quote successes in countries that have been able to reduce military spending on the advocacy that has happened on this, but just to say that in calling for the elevation of protocols such as the Maputo Protocol, which has for many years advocated for reduced military spending, for this to be redirected to social work. Social services, we begin to see that in as much as there were calls for this even during COVID and the pandemic really coming at countries as an opportune moment for this to happen, this hasn't happened to date. So just stating that the fact for continuous implementation of agreed upon protocols, particularly at the regional level, in supporting the question that has been raised.
Thank you, Yvette. I'm going to selfishly take a question online that was directed to me. But what are your plans post this report, and in what ways will you be looking to take this critical collaborative work forward? So just to say, this paper is long, but it has great content, but we will translate it. It's currently only available in English, but you have our word, but soon it will be available in many more languages. And And just to say that we really want to engage with you all. We want to get your feedback. We want your suggestions for improvement. This is just one paper, and there is a lot of expertise and scholarship around the world that we're really eager to engage in. And also just to note that we have a global coalition that the collaborative manages. It's called the Global Partner Network for Feminist Foreign Policy. It is an informal, global, and multi-stakeholder network of both governments and civil society organizations coming together to discuss advocacy and research work on this agenda. So if you're interested, check out our website or reach out to us, and we'll dig in. So we have a couple more in-person questions. So Samira, please.
Thanks. First, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for this wonderful conversation and for the FFP Collaborative for the great work on the paper. My question is for Ms. Bianco. Unfortunately, the audio cut out right as you were saying this, and I was just hoping you could elaborate on your point. I was really excited to hear what you had to say. You were mentioning the Green Wave movement and obviously the issues of maternal mortality and unsafe abortions being some leading causes of death for women. And you are saying that the Green Wave movement is not just for abortion, and then it cut off right there. So I was hoping you could finish your conversation on that and just the connection SRHR and feminist foreign policy. Thanks.
Thank you. Mabel, would you respond to that question? Okay, I think we've unfortunately lost Mabel's connection once more, but we will connect you with her and we'll get you an answer to your question. So please, we have another question in the room.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for everybody for the great work. My name is Irene Oguma, and I'm a former worker with the United Nations and also ECOWAS. My question is simple. I wanted to know which correlation, link, or continuation of effort can be made or not between the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative Paper. I did remember that for the UN Security Council, when launched then, Canada has been a lead country in kind of making it known to everyone. And I want to know what are the strategies and then plan to raise more awareness around the FPP, because I think it's more engaging than the first one. So I just want to know which link we can make between the two. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth, I'm looking to you if you want to take that one.
I think there's a very close and intimate relationship between the work and the Women, Peace and Security on 1325 on the UN Security Council resolutions on women, peace and security and feminist foreign policy. I think perhaps we haven't explored them to the degree that they could totally be explored, but with the questions around participation, the four pillars of women, peace and security linked to feminist foreign policy. I think one of the things that I've heard is for some people, feminist foreign policy is much more engaging because of the breadth, because of the use of the term feminist. But for others, the women, peace and security agenda is more concrete, more bounded, and perhaps is an easier entryway into talking about some of the security implications as the person, the question that was asked. So I think there's lots of common ground there. And there's real fertile areas to explore and move forward. I know that there's many people who are very comfortable talking about women, peace and security, but don't want to talk about feminist foreign policy. So that may be good in some circles, but I know for a lot of the people in the room that maybe that's frustrating because it doesn't take us quite so far. But I think it's an area worth exploring. Have you found it inside the Netherlands? Is women, peace and security easier to engage on, or?
I think for some parts, yes. 1325 is older, I would say, than well, especially our feminist foreign policy. and we have our fourth national action plan. So it's much more common, and it's sometimes easier to refer to something clear cut. It's not necessarily, but as 1325 women, peace and security. And for us, it's part and parcel of our feminist foreign policy. So it's an important angle. And again, I am, if it's easier for some to discuss the WPS agenda than it is to discuss feminist foreign policy, I'll take it. I don't really.
Thank you both. We're out of time and over time, so I just want to reiterate my thanks. I have been so looking forward to this event for months, and to be joined by you all on this panel is exactly how I wanted to celebrate the launch of this report. So I'll reserve all my gratitude and I'll let Lyric take it from here. So Lyric, if you could please close us off.
Thank you so much to the panel. Silent applause. Thank you to our wonderful panelists who are online. Your spirit was very much with us in the room. We appreciate you. Our hearts go out to Memory and Mabel, and we are so pleased to be in person here in Washington with Karen and Beth. Ambassador Perceval, thank you for starting us off on such a strong foot, and thank you for all the work that your government is doing on the human right to care, which we are over time on my child care. As you can see, this is Helen. She wants a feminist foreign policy too. I'm so grateful to our funders, to GW's Gender Equality and International Affairs program. To all of you, please have a pastry, please have a water, and please go about your work of making foreign policy just a little more feminist. We appreciate you.